everyone, and welcome back to our podcast. I am the Disturbed Southern Belle.
And I'm the gentleman.
We're going to be continuing this week talking about some more of the Grimm Brothers and their fairy tales and how twisted they are. So last week we talked about 4 of the lesser known and also Cinderella and Snow White. And this week we're going to first pick up with Little Red Riding Hood. So Little Red Riding Hood is already sort of a dark tale anyway because, it involves a little girl with the wolf and whatever. And it's also been adapted into some movies dealing with like werewolves and things like that as well. So it's already kind of a dark tale. But we're going to look at the actual origin of the story and how the actual story goes. So once upon a time, there was this sweet little girl, and everyone who saw her liked her, but most of all her grandmother. And she never knew what to give her next. So one day she gives her a little cap made of red velvet, and because it suited her so well and she wanted to wear it all the time, she came to be known as Little Red Riding Hood. So that's where she got her name. And one day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood, here's a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is sick and weak, and they will do her well." She also told her to behave on the way and not leave the path, or she might fall down and break the glass, and there will be nothing for her sick grandmother. So Little Red Riding Hood, she promises to obey her mother, and she takes off. So the grandmother lives out in the woods about a half an hour from the village, and Little Red Riding Hood enters the woods, and then a wolf comes up to her. And she didn't know that this wolf was kind of a wicked animal. And he asked her, good day, whatever, where's she going, and all that. And she tells him that her grandmother's sick and weak, and she's taking her some cake and wine, and that they should give her strength. And he asked her, where her grandmother lives. And she tells her house is a good quarter hour from here in the woods under the 3 large oaks, and there's a hedge of hazel bushes there. And, you must know where it is. And, in other words, it's easy to see. Wolf thought to himself, now there's a tasty bite for me. Just how are you going to catch her? Okay, so the wolf is basically now plotting how he's going to eat Little Red Riding Hood. So he tells her, "Listen, Little Red Riding Hood, haven't you seen the beautiful flowers that are blossoming in the woods? Why don't you take a look? And I don't believe you've heard how beautifully the birds are singing. You're walking along as though you were on your way to school in the village, and it's very beautiful in the woods." So he's basically trying to tempt her to stop or something so that he can, get her, basically. So she looks around and she sees the ground is covered with these beautiful flowers, and she thinks, well, I'll take a bouquet to my grandmother and she'll be very pleased. And it's still early and I'll be home on time anyway, so she goes off in the woods looking for flowers. And each time she picks one, she thought that she could see an even more beautiful one a little way off. And she ran after it, going further and further into the woods. So she's picking these flowers, she keeps thinking she's seeing one that's better, yada yada, and she keeps going deeper and deeper into the woods, basically what the wolf is trying to get her to do.
Not really smart to just keep going deeper and deeper into the woods. She's on a mission anyway.
She is. Right. She's supposed to be going to check on her grandmother and everything. And
Who
she's
is sick.
Right, and she's getting distracted. So while she's picking these flowers, the wolf goes straight to the grandmother's house and knocks on the door. And the grandmother says, "Who's there?" And he replies, "Little Red Riding Hood, I'm bringing you some cake and wine. Open the door for me." The old woman inside the grandmother, she says, "Just open the door and come on in. I'm too weak to get up." So the wolf opens the door, goes in, and he goes straight to her bed and eats her up. So he eats the grandmother. Then he takes her clothes, puts them on, and puts her cap on his head. Then he gets into bed and pulls the curtain shut.
Either he can eat real cleanly, or something's up with the lack of blood.
Really, though. I mean, the stories I've heard in the past, it was supposed to be sort of like he kind of swallowed her. Like, I don't even know how to describe it, like a snake, I guess, or something. He doesn't even chew or anything. I mean, in some of the stories I've heard. Now, I'm not sure about this original story yet, but yeah, you would think there would be some blood or something.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of it from a realistic standpoint.
Right. So while this was all going on with the grandmother, Little Red Riding Hood's still running around the forest picking flowers, and she doesn't go on to her grandmother's house until basically she's gathered all the flowers she can carry. So she goes on in after that and goes to her grandmother's house, and she finds that the door's open, and that's actually surprising because normally it's not. So she goes into the parlor, and everything looks strange, and she thought, why am I so afraid? I usually like it at grandmother's. So she goes over to the bed, and she pulls back the curtains, and lying there with the cap pulled down over her face and looking very strange, she sees her grandmother, or who she thinks is her grandmother. And she says, "Oh, grandmother, what big ears you have." And the wolf says, "All the better to hear you with." And then she says, "Oh, grandmother, what big eyes you have." And he replies, "All the better to see you with." And then she says, "Oh, grandmother, what big hands you have." And then he says, "All the better to grab you with." And then she says, "Oh, grandmother, what a horribly big mouth you have." And he says, "All the better to eat you with." And then he jumps up off the bed, jumps on top of poor little Red Riding Hood, and eats her too.
She must be blind.
Yeah, really. I
Or
know.
at least have very, very poor
Yeah, really.
eyesight.
Because even if he's got that pulled down, I'm saying it's a wolf, a dog looking thing, not person at all. So, yeah. And she opened the curtain. I mean, I guess it maybe it's still kind of dark in there. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. It's kind of stupid, but yes.
This actually kind of has me thinking of an old like cartoon movie I
Right.
watched years ago, Hoodwinked.
Right. It does. It definitely does. I remember that movie. And yes, it's definitely some similar. Yes.
Which, of course, it would be. It's
Right.
Little Red.
So now the wolf has ate the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood, and apparently he's tired. So he comes into bed and he goes to sleep. And he begins to snore very loudly. And now there's this huntsman that's passing by, and he thought it strange that this old woman was snoring so loudly. So he decides to take a look. So he steps inside in bed and he sees that the wolf is there, and he recognizes it immediately, unlike Little Red Riding Hood, and knows that it's been this wolf that he's been hunting for a long time. So he thinks, well, he's eaten the grandmother, but perhaps she can still be saved. He says, well, I won't shoot him, he thought. So he took a pair of scissors and cuts open the wolf's belly. He had only cut a few strokes when he saw the red cap shining through. He cut a little more, and Red Riding Hood jumps out, and she says, "Oh, I was so frightened. It was so dark inside the wolf's body." And then the grandmother came out alive as well. Then Little Red Riding Hood fetched some large, heavy stones. They filled the wolf's body with them, and when he woke up and tried to run away, the stones were so heavy that he fell down dead. Now, the three of them were so happy that the huntsman took the wolf's pelt, the grandmother ate the cake, drank the wine, and Little Red Riding Hood had brought for her. And Little Red Riding Hood thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never leave the path and run off into the woods by myself if Mother tells me not to." So, lesson learned.
Just
It is. They're both inside, and I've heard this one before, and that is actually the story I've actually heard before. Actually, ironically enough, that they were inside him the whole time, and
I don't think I've heard this one.
I've heard it that version actually, and it's a weird.
You might have told it to me years ago.
I probably did, to be honest, because I told you I'm Polish growing up. So yeah, it's one of the ones that we went over. But yeah, it's a weird one.
Jesus Christ, this is honestly on the level of the Grimm Brothers.
It is. I mean, it is. I mean, they've got some. They pick some really twisted tales to add to their stories. Definitely.
Which is, of course, their whole reason we're doing these.
Right. Exactly.
About the Grimm Brothers.
Right. So we've talked about Little Red Riding Hood and her inability to tell a wolf from her grandmother.
Yep.
And how that was her, not demise, but she got
could have very well been her demise.
It could have been.
Had it not been for the hunter.
Right. If it hadn't been for the hunter, yeah. So, I mean, apparently this wolf has no stomach acid, no nothing, so he can just swallow people whole.
Also a very large stomach.
Right. So he's very much like a snake. Like we said earlier, apparently. He's swallowing people whole. I mean...
Yep. Part wolf, part snake.
Part wolf, part snake. So next we're going to talk about Rapunzel. So this is one that we actually watched maybe not too long ago of this, Tangled, which is, a play on Rapunzel, of course. So basically this story starts out, and there was once this man and his wife who they had wished for this child for a long time in vain. They couldn't have a child. At the back of their house, though, there's this little window that overlooked this beautiful garden full of the finest vegetables and flowers. But there was a high wall all around it, and no one ever ventured into it, for it belonged to a witch of great might and whom everybody was afraid of. So out behind their house, there was this wall and behind that wall was this big garden full of flowers and vegetables and stuff. But of course, they never went into it because it belonged to a witch.
So they essentially live right next to a witch.
Correct. They live right next to a witch.
Very smart housing location.
Yeah, really. I guess so. Maybe that made a cheaper house. I don't know. I'm not sure about the real estate market in that area, but anyway.
It must have been dirt cheap to be next to a witch.
You would think so, yes, definitely.
I don't imagine many people would be wanting to live there.
I wouldn't think so, no. Got this man and woman, they live next to this witch. She's got this garden, and so one day this woman, she's standing at the window, and she's looking out across that garden, and she sees a bed filled with the finest flowers, and it looks so fresh and green, and she begins to wish for some. And at length, she longed for it greatly. And this went on for days. And she knew she could not get the flowers because, they belong to the witch. So she pines away and grows pale and miserable. Then the man gets uneasy and he asks her what's the matter. And she says, "Oh, I shall die unless I can have some of those flowers that grow in the back of the house." And the man, who loved her very much, thought to himself, "Rather than lose my wife, I will go get her these flowers, cost what it will." So in the twilight, so like dusk, dawn, whatever, he climbs over the wall, goes to the witch's garden, and gets some of these flowers and brings them back to his wife. And, she's like all happy or whatever, and she liked it so much and whatever. And the next day she longs for it thrice as much as she did the day before. So she's not satisfied. So now she is craving these flowers 3 times as much. So, of course, she tells her husband this, and he's going to go climb back over the wall again. So he sets out and does it. And this time when he's climbing over, he sees the witch standing there. And, of course, he's terribly frightened and everything. And she cries out with angry eyes and says, "How dare you climb over into my garden like a thief and steal my flowers, and it shall be worse for you." So he answers and tells her, "Be merciful, and everything, because I've only done it through necessity. My wife saw your flowers out the window and became possessed and so great a longing that she had that basically she was going to die if I didn't get her some."
Yep,
Which,
no greater necessity than my wife wants them.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's stupid when you really break it down. But yes, that's basically what happened.
Reminds me of them good old witch hunting days.
There you go.
There's no greater accusation, no better proof than she's a witch.
There you go. Exactly.
Another thing is just try to ask the witch for the flowers.
Right. Exactly.
You're at greater risk trying to steal them from her.
You would think so. Absolutely.
You're gonna get cursed.
Or something, I'm sure she's not going to be happy. You would think, I mean, she could be reasoned with or whatever. I mean, they never even tried to talk to her. Everybody was just scared of her, but it never really says why. I mean, I'm guessing just because she's a witch, but still, that doesn't mean she's automatically evil.
Plus, are these flowers like super rare or something?
I don't know. Apparently so. Apparently this is the only place you can get them, evidently, or something. I don't know. I mean, do they even look for anywhere else? It doesn't sound like it. It just sounds like she saw
them one day and I want them now.
Exactly. She saw him, wanted them, and he went out to get them. And then he gets her some. Then she wants them 3 times as much after that. So he goes back to get her some more. And the witch catches him. So basically, the witch catches him and tells him that he can have as many flowers as he likes, as on one condition. So tells him that he's going to have a child, and that when that child comes into the world, that they have to give the child to her, and that she will care for it like a mother. So in his distress, he basically tells her, okay. So he says, "Sure, you can have my child. This child they've longed for years."
This is possibly one of the dumbest men I've ever heard.
It is pretty stupid. So then later on, the wife, she has a baby, and it's a little girl, and they give it to the witch. The witch appears, and they say, "Okay, here you go," and they give it to her. And she names her Rapunzel and takes her away. So shows up, the baby's born, she takes the baby, she goes away, and she names her Rapunzel.
They must not have wanted the baby that badly.
Apparently not, because apparently she wanted those flowers more than she wanted the baby, evidently.
Apparently so.
Apparently so, yes, definitely. So basically, Rapunzel is supposed to be like the most beautiful child in the world. And when she becomes 12 years old, the witch decides to shut her up in this tower in the midst of the woods. So she takes her out in this tower and puts her up in there, and there's no way to get up and down, basically, supposedly. Only there's supposed to be like this small window, like at the top of the tower, and that's it. And so the witch would stand out there and basically say, as we've heard, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And Rapunzel was supposed to have this long hair that shone like gold. And when she would hear the voice of the witch, she would basically undo her hair, whatever, and let it down. And it's supposed to be like at least 20 feet below, and the witch would climb up by it.
Well, move aside, Snow White.
Right.
There's a new child that
there's a new more beautiful child. She's more fair, so I guess the stepmother's gonna go after her probably. Okay, so she's living out here in this tower, and this is supposed to have been going on for like a few years. And it happens that the king's son is riding through the woods, and he comes to the tower, and he drew near, and he hears a voice, and it's singing so sweetly, he stands still and he listens. And it's Rapunzel, and it's her loneliness. She's trying to pass away the time with sweet songs. So the prince, he wished to go into her and sought to find a door to the tower, but of course there was none.
Well, that doesn't sound suggestive at all.
Exactly.
He wishes to go into her.
Well, he wishes to go into where she is. Let's say it that way.
Good phrasing, Mom.
I'm sorry. But anyway, yes. He wishes to go into the tower where she is. Okay, so there's no door or anything, so he rides home. But the song that she was singing has entered into his heart. And every day he goes into the woods and he listens to her sing. So one time when he's standing there under a tree, he sees the witch come up and he listens to her call out, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. And he sees the hair come out, these long tresses come out, and he sees the witch climb up them and go in the tower. And he says to himself, since that is the ladder, I will climb it and seek my fortune. And I'm not really sure, seek my fortune, what exactly?
Must be a euphemism for love or something?
I don't know. That's what he says. So the next day he goes back and it's starting to get dark and he goes to the tower and he cries out, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. And she does.
Yeah, because why wouldn't you? Just some stranger. Some strange man. You've never heard his voice before.
Yeah, apparently. Exactly.
That could go wrong in no ways whatsoever.
For real, right. I mean, that's kind of stupid too. There's another one that's kind of dumb. Okay, so she lets down her hair. He climbs up it. And then he gets in the tower with her, and she's terrified because there's this man in front of her, and she's never seen one before, apparently.
Well, what did you expect? This was a different voice, male voice.
Exactly.
Although I guess to be fair, if she's never heard a male voice, she wouldn't know what a male voice was. But still, a complete stranger.
Exactly. She would know it was a different voice at the very least, you would think.
You have no right to be surprised about this.
Well, you wouldn't think so, no. But apparently she was. She was frightened and she was like, whatever. But the prince is like, he began speaking really kindly to her. And he told her how her singing had entered into his heart and whatever that means.
Cool. So now she's entered him.
Yeah, there you go. And so he tells her that he has had no peace until he was able to see her for himself. He's been thinking about her this whole time and she forgets her terror and asked him to take her for his wife.
Oh God, it's the flowers all over again.
It is. And so he sees that she's young and beautiful, and he's like, well, okay. And she looks at him and she thinks to him that she likes him better than old Mother Gothel, which is the witch, which we finally hear her name. So she says, okay, I'll go willingly with you, but I do not know how I shall get out. So she doesn't know how she can get out of the tower, but she's just, okay, I've seen you for this 1.3 seconds, so I'm just going to go ahead and marry you, and here we go.
Yup.
Because why wouldn't you?
Only reason I would accept this is if she was like she was in Tangle. If a witch of a mother.
Right. I mean, at least there she had a reason. She wanted to go see the lights. I mean, she wasn't actually taken off, like, to be with this guy. She wanted him to take her to see those lanterns on Tangled, the movie, But on this one, she's just like, well, whatever. You want to be my husband? Sure, why not? Let's do this.
Yep, the people in this world, in this time, are not smart.
No, they're just
whatsoever.
They just take off on any whim that comes along. Apparently, whatever. They don't care.
I think the smartest person that I've heard so far in any of these stories is the witch.
Yeah, exactly. So she basically tells him that she's going to go with him or whatever, and they're going to make this ladder out of this silken rope.
Which doesn't really make sense. You'd think it'd just be simpler to just lop off her hair.
You would, yes.
It's already been established that it can hold a fair amount of weight.
Right.
Plus, it's got to be long enough.
Right. It can definitely hold a person anyway.
If he can climb up it, they can climb down separately, if not together. And it wouldn't be that hard. Just lop it off and tie one end to like a hook or something.
Right. But they decide on this plan. So basically, she tells him to bring this silken rope, and she tells him that they're going to make this ladder, and that's how she's going to climb down. So she tells him to come every day in evening, as the witch is going to come in the daytime. So the witch don't know what's going on or whatever. She doesn't know that the prince has been there. So one day she goes to Rapunzel and whatever, climbs up her hair, and Rapunzel says to her, Mother Gothel, how is it that you climb up here so slowly, but the king's son is with me in a moment? So she's basically told on herself and said that the prince is climbing up her hair now. So now
she is very stupid.
Correct. Absolutely.
I'm convinced that every female in these older stories is
They make
stupid.
them, yeah, they don't make them very intelligent. They really
That may
don't.
be on purpose because
It
how
may
old these
be,
are and values at
right,
school.
exactly. And women were looked at differently. So that could be partially what it is. But yes, the women are
Then
very,
again, pretty much everybody's stupid, so
they're not smart. No.
even animals are stupid.
Yeah. So the witch basically says then, "Oh, you wicked child, what is this I hear? I thought I had hidden thee from all the world, and thou hast betrayed me." So she gets really mad, of course, and she seizes Rapunzel by her hair, and she strikes her several times with her left hand. And then she takes a pair of shears in her right hand, and snip, snap, she cuts her hair off. And as she was so hard hearted that she took Rapunzel and put her in a waste and desert place where she lived in great woe and misery. So on the same day which she had taken Rapunzel away, she went back to the tower in the evening and made fast the severed locks of hair to the window. So basically, she's made a rope out of her hair now. And when the king's son,
Prince.
right,
Okay.
so when the king's son comes and says, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she lets down the hair, but Rapunzel is not there.
Oh, would you look at that? The hair got lopped off anyway.
It did, the witch. So the prince climbs up the hair and he sees that it's not Rapunzel waiting for him, but the witch. And she says, "Aha! You came for your darling, but the sweet bird sits no longer in the nest and sings no more. The cat has got her and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will see her no more." So the prince is beside himself with grief. And in his agony, he springs from the tower and he escapes with his life. But the thorns on which he falls put his eyes out, so he's blinded.
Jesus Christ.
So, yeah. He wanders blindly through the woods, eating nothing but roots and berries, and doing nothing but weeping for the loss of his dearest wife. So he wanders around for several years in misery until at last he comes to the desert place where Rapunzel lived with her twin children, which I don't know how all this came to
And
pass.
no one was missing the prince?
And no one was missing the prince, and I don't know, I'm guessing they got it on at some point, and they have kids and whatever. So she's got a boy and a girl, and he hears the voice and he thought he knew it, and he reaches the place from where he thought it was coming from, and Rapunzel sees him and she knows him, and he starts crying and whatever, and then she starts crying as well, and her tears fall on his eyes and they become clear again, and he could see with them now as clear as he could before.
Yay.
Exactly. So then he takes her back to his kingdom where he was received with great joy, and there they lived long and happily. So they had a happily ever after.
Well, once again, he's wandering. He's gone for years. And nobody
Yes.
thought to launch a search party.
Evidently they didn't care, or maybe they was looking for him. They couldn't find. I don't know, but yeah, he's wandering around the woods blinded.
Also, it's a miracle he even managed to survive.
It
He's
is.
completely blinded.
He is. Yeah.
How would he even have found the roots and
I
berries?
don't know. Just luck, I guess. I don't know. It's crazy. It is. It's a nutty one. Very,
Well, it's a
very
matter of
nutty.
luck he didn't either get devoured by an animal or fall and impale himself.
Or
Or fall
something,
in a
right? Or
match or
just get
something.
hurt in some way, anything. Yeah, it'd been a very dangerous place to be in. Absolutely. Okay, so moving on. Next, we're going to talk about Sleeping Beauty, and she's also known as Briar Rose. So basically, it starts out, and there was this king and queen who said to each other every day of their lives that they wanted to have a child, and yet they didn't have one. So one day, the queen is taking a bath, and there comes a frog out of the water. And he squats on the ground and says to her, "Thy wish shall be fulfilled. Before a year is gone by, thou shalt bring a daughter into the world." And as the frog foretold, it happened, and the queen bore a daughter so beautiful that the king could not contain himself for joy, and he ordained a great feast.
Well, great. Just another most beautiful girl in the world.
Exactly. All these girls are the most beautiful in the world, apparently.
Step aside, other two.
There you go. Exactly. So he invites all of his relations and friends, but he also invites the wise women of the court, and he wants them to be kind and favorable to the child. And there's 13 of them in his kingdom. But he only has 12 golden plates for them to eat from. So one of them has to be left out. So the feast is going on and everything. And as it draws to an end, the wise women stand up and they're going to present the child with presents. So one gives her virtue, one beauty, one gives her riches, and so on. Whatever in the world there is to wish for, they're giving it to her. And when 11 of them had their say, it came for the 13th one to show up.
The one without the golden dish.
Right. And she's burning to get revenge because she wasn't able to get there with a greeting or the respect of the others. So she cries in a loud voice, "In the 15th year of her age, the princess shall prick herself with a spindle and shall fall down dead." Because, of course,
why not?
Exactly. Why not? I mean, why would she not be, pricking her? Why would she not be using the spindle? Whatever. Why not?
Why not an exact thing that
it's very specific. Yes, it's very specific.
I don't understand the need for specifics. I mean, if you have specifics, you're giving the people a chance to prevent that.
Exactly.
I mean, I get it's a curse. It's supposed to be self-fulfilling and all that. But, gee,
it is. I mean, it's basically telling them what's going to do it so they could destroy it, you would think, but whatever. Okay, so there was 11 of these wise women, and they've given the gift, and then the 13th one that wasn't invited comes in and gives the curse. So that leaves the 12th one that was initially invited and did have the plate, and she comes forward, and she hasn't given her gift yet. So she says, "The princess shall not die, but fall into a deep sleep for 100 years." So the king, of course, he's like, distressed and whatever, and he wants to save his child from this happening. So he gives out this command that all the spindles in the kingdom shall be burned up.
I didn't get a golden dish.
Right.
Your daughter will die. Well, she'll fall asleep for a very long time.
Yeah, the last one makes it where she'll fall asleep, but the initial plan was for her to die. Yes, because she didn't get invited to the feast. So the maiden, or Sleeping Beauty, she grows up and she's adorned with all the gifts of the wise women that they gave her. She's lovely, modest, sweet, kind, clever, whatever. And nobody that came around her could help but look. So one day when she's 15 years old, again, like she was prophesied, the king and queen decide to ride out and go on a trip. And while they're gone, they leave her alone, and she's in the castle, and she's wandering around, looking around in all the nooks and corners and whatever. And she comes into this old tower, and she climbs the narrow, winding stairway or whatever, and she goes up to this little door and has a rusty key sticking out of the lock, and she turns the key, opens the door, goes in there, and there's an old woman with a spindle that is spinning flax. Right. So, I mean, we can probably guess who this probably is. I mean, I'm sure this is going to be perfectly good and
fine.
I
don't see anything wrong with
I
this.
can't foretell any bad things happening at this point.
Did no one tell her of the curse?
It doesn't say they did, so maybe she doesn't know. Maybe they told, they thought that they had done away with all the spindles and that she'd be fine and whatever, and maybe they never actually told.
Still.
So in that, we can give her a pass because maybe she doesn't know.
Her, but not her parents.
Right. They should have been.
Her parents are, once again, the most idiotic people on the planet.
They definitely should have been more diligent. Absolutely. So she sees this woman spinning the flax or whatever, and she asks her what she's doing, and the woman tells her that she's spinning. And she asks her, "What is that twists around so briskly?" And she takes the Sleeping Beauty takes the spindle into her hand, and she begins to spin it herself. But no sooner than she, of course, does it, she touches it, and the evil prophecy is fulfilled because she pricks her finger and, of course, falls back dead into a dead sleep. So she's in this sleep, and the sleep actually ends up falling over the whole castle. So the king and queen, they have returned at this point, and they're in the great hall, and they go to sleep. And then the whole court, the horses in their stall, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons on the roof, the flies on the wall, the very fire that flickered on the hearth became still and slept like the dead. And
sorry, when was this mentioned?
Yeah, I don't know. It never said that all that was going to happen, but apparently
it seems a bit like twisting the deal.
Yeah, it does, because she only said that she was going to fall into a deep sleep, but apparently everybody and everything.
That was never specified. No, it was all her specification.
No, absolutely it was not. So everything around the castle becomes just dead. So the wind even ceases blowing, and not even a leaf falls from the trees about the castle. Then around the castle, there goes this hedge of thorns, and every year it gets thicker and thicker and thicker, until at last the whole castle was hidden from view and nothing could be seen but the weather vane on top of the roof.
Something else. What about the woman? The woman that cursed her, she was in the castle.
I don't know. I guess she was magical and got away, apparently. So I guess she didn't fall asleep, evidently.
Eh.
She wasn't touched by this, whatever, the deep sleep thing.
Also,
Whatever.
it seems more like stopping time
Yeah,
than
I
putting to
guess so.
sleep.
Sorta, yeah. And that's what it sounds like, yeah. So then there's this rumor that goes out in all the country and whatever, and basically tells about this sleeping princess and this beautiful princess or whatever. And so from time to time, there's these different princesses that are princes that come and they try to force their way through the thorns in the hedge and whatever, but they can't do it. So they get stuck and whatever, and they basically die.
Huh. Well, that's interesting.
Right. So there's all these dead guys now outside the castle stuck in the thorns.
So they just died because of the thorns or because of the curse?
I don't know. I guess they got stuck in the thorns and couldn't get free. They're supposed to grab them like strong hands, held them, and I guess they maybe died, maybe dehydration or whatever. So, whatever.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
exactly.
Interesting thorns.
Uh-huh. So a lot of years pass, and then there's this prince that comes and he talks to this old man and he tells him how there's supposed to be this castle standing behind this hedge of thorns, and behind there there's supposed to be this beautiful enchanted princess, and she's been asleep for 100 years, and with her is the king and queen and the whole court, and they're all asleep and whatever. And so he basically tells him that, there's these thorns all around there and that there's been many people who've tried to break through this hedge or whatever, and they all died a miserable death. And the prince or whatever, he says, nevertheless, I do not fear to try. I shall win through and see the lovely Rosamond, which was supposed to be her name.
Huh. Guess now I understand the whole Briar Rose thing then.
Right. So her name is supposed to be like Rosamond or whatever. So yeah, I guess that's kind of where the Briar Rose sort of came into play. So the old man, he tries to, dissuade him. He tells him, don't go, whatever, it's sure death or whatever. But, he won't listen to him. And the old man tells him, the 100 years are coming to an end and that the princess should be awakened soon. So the prince, he says he's going to go and he's going to try his luck, basically. So he goes out and he gets near the hedge of thorns, but now it's changed into this hedge of these beautiful large flowers, and they part and they bend aside to let him pass. So he doesn't have to fight through the thorns, and then they close back behind him and they form the hedge again.
Well, that's interesting,
Right.
to say the least.
Right. So they're flowers, and then they open up this opening, they let him come in, and then it turns back into thorns and it comes back and it's a hedge.
True love, I guess.
Right. So he comes into the courtyard and he sees like the horses and the hunting dogs and everything is asleep, and he looks on the roof and he sees the pigeons are sitting with their heads under their wings and everybody's asleep. So he goes inside and he sees the cook in the kitchen and she's asleep, the kitchen maid, everybody's asleep. So he goes higher into start climbing stairs or whatever, and he gets up like in the different floors or whatever, and he sees his hall, and he sees that everybody's asleep, and the king and queen are sitting on their thrones, they're asleep, and then he goes further in, and all he can hear is his own breathing. And at last he comes to this tower, and he goes to the winding stair again, and he opens the door to this little room where Sleeping Beauty is. And he sees her looking so lovely in her sleep, he cannot turn away his eyes, and he stoops down and he kisses.
Yep. True love's kiss, I guess.
There you go. So basically, he's come in, seen everybody asleep. He keeps going through the castle. He finds her and he kisses her. Okay, so he kisses her. She wakes up, opens her eyes, and she looks around, and she's looking very kindly on him. So she gets up and they go forth together, and the king and queen and the whole court, everybody's waking up and everything, and they're looking at each other with wonderment and whatever. And the horses are getting up and whatever, the dogs are getting up, wagging their tails, the pigeons on the roof drew their heads from under their wings, whatever. And so the cook is, cooking the meat and whatever, and then the wedding starts immediately, apparently. And they have a wedding and they're married and they live happily ever after because, of course, again, I don't understand these people. They have no courtship whatsoever. He kisses her, she wakes up, and they go out and they just immediately get married.
Why not?
Exactly. Why
Is
not?
that really any weirder than throwing animal eyeballs at?
No, it's not. It is definitely not. But I mean, definitely, they never have heard of any kind of courtship whatsoever.
Also, I guess to be fair to Hans, he did know Gretel for at least a little while.
Well, yeah, I mean, he did. I mean, at least he did know her for a bit. He went over there a few times at the very least. Now, granted, he may knew her longer than that, but yeah, as opposed to some of these, yeah, at least he did have a little bit of a relationship with her as opposed to.
Also, for context, see our last episode where we covered that
Right.
and a few other interesting stories.
Yeah, clever Hans. He was definitely super clever.
Interesting.
So yeah, y'all would definitely want to go check that out because those are some very interesting ones. Those are some of the lesser known ones. Okay, so moving on. Next, we're going to talk about Rumpelstiltskin.
Yay, one of my personal favorites.
Right. Okay, so there was once this miller, and he's very poor, but he has this beautiful daughter. So one day he comes to speak to the king and to give himself, favor with the king or whatever. So he comes to talk to the king and he tells him that he's got this daughter who can spin gold out of straw. And the king says to him, "That is an art that pleases me well. If thy daughter is as clever as you say, bring her to the castle tomorrow that I may put her to the proof." So he's
Gee, I wonder why that would please the king.
really, right? So basically, he goes to him, tells him, "Hey, I got this daughter to spin gold." And the king's like, "Well, that sounds good to me." Because,
Yep.
right. Bring her on over. Let's see what she can do. So the girl is brought to the king, and he leads her into this room that is full of straw. And he gives her a wheel and a spindle, and he says to her, "Now set to work, and if by the early morning you haven't spun this straw into gold, you're going to die." And he shuts the door and leaves her alone.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, he's not playing around. So she's sitting there and could not think of what to do for her life because she didn't know how to spin gold into straw from straw or whatever. And basically her father had lied. And so she's very distressed and she starts to cry. So then the door opens and in comes this little man who says, "Good evening, miller's daughter. Why are you crying?" So the girl says, "I've got to spin gold out of straw and I don't understand how to do it." So he says, "What will you give me if I spin it for you?" So she tells him, "I'll give you my necklace." So he takes her necklace and then sets himself before the wheel and whir, 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 3 times around, and the bobbin was full. And he took up another whir, 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 3 times around. That was full. And he went on until morning when all the straw had been spun and all the bobbins were full of gold. So at sunrise, the king comes in and he sees that all the straw has been made into gold. And of course, he's very happy about this. And he takes her and he puts her into another room that's filled with straw, but it's even bigger than the last room. And he tells her that if she values her life, she must spend it all in one night. So
you'd think he wouldn't be so demanding, seeing as how she can literally weave gold from straw as far as he knows.
As far as he knows, yeah. Yeah, he's being kind of a dick. He really is. He's not being nice at all about it. He's being very, very demanding. I mean, basically, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill you. So, yeah, it's not
And
a
if
nice
he kills
person.
her, he's going to lose his access to such easy gold.
Exactly. So, it's kind of stupid to.
He's an idiot.
Yeah.
Again, another idiot.
Exactly. Okay, so again, she doesn't know what to do because she doesn't know how to spin the straw into gold. So she starts to cry again, and the door opens, and the little man comes in again, and he says, "What will you give me if I spin all this straw into gold?" And this time she tells him she'll give him the ring from her finger. So he takes the ring, and again, he sits down and whir, 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 he begins to spin all the straw into gold. And the next morning, of course, it's all gold again. So the king comes in and he's again happy and he just can't, he's beside himself or whatever because, you never have enough gold. So with that mentality, you can never have enough gold. He takes her into another room that is even bigger than the last room. So this is
how much straw does this man have?
I don't know. And how
just in these random rooms.
In these random rooms, and each one's bigger. I don't know. Apparently a lot. I don't know why he'd have all this straw stored up in these rooms, but he does. So he's got this third room, and it's even bigger than the first two or whatever. And he tells her the same thing. This too has to be spun into gold in one night. But this time he tells her if she does it, that she's going to be his wife. So, of course, I mean, why would she not want to be his wife? Because he is such a good and great person.
Is she still under the threat of death?
I suppose, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe not this time, but this time, if she can do it the third time, she's going to be his wife. So I don't know if she's going to die this time or not, but yeah, why would she not want to go for this offer? Because it sounds like a good one.
It really does.
It does. So basically, she tries to do it. So, she's sitting there and she's crying and whatever. And the little man comes in again, of course. And again, he tells her, what can you give me or whatever if I do this? And this time she tells him, well, I don't have anything left to give you. So he says, well, then you must promise me the first child you have after you are queen. So she says, sure, she'll do it. And she didn't know, of course, if she's going to have a child or not, but she promised him this, basically, whatever. Just tell him she'd do whatever he wanted just so he would, spin a straw and go. So he does it, and the king comes in the morning and he sees all the gold and he's happy and whatever. And of course, he marries her and she becomes a queen.
Yay! Happy endings for all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's over. It's all happy. Yes, of course. So after about a year, she has a child. And she didn't really she hadn't thought anything about the little man, Rumpelstiltskin or whatever. She didn't know his name or anything at this point, of course. But she just knew he was a little man and she hadn't thought anything about him or whatever. And then he comes in one day and he's like, well, give me what you promised me. And she's like terrified. She offers them all these riches of the kingdom, gold, whatever, anything, if he'll just leave the child alone. He says, no, I'd rather have something living than all the treasures of the world. So she begins to cry and weep and whatever. And he says, I'll give you 3 days because he takes pity on her. So he's going to give her 3 days to mourn the loss of her child. He's going to, she's going to give to him. So he tells her, I'll give you 3 days. And at the end of that time, you cannot tell me my name, then you have to give the child to me. So basically he tells her if she can guess his name in 3 days, that she doesn't have to give him the child and, they'll be squared or whatever. So she spends the whole night, thinking over all the names that she'd ever heard, and she sends a messenger through the land to ask far and wide all the names that can be found. And when the little man came the next day, she starts, naming off names. She's like Casper, Balthazar, and she names off all these names that she knows. And she goes through the whole list, but each time the little man said, that's not my name. So the second day, she sends out to inquire to all the neighbors and servants and ask them the same thing, what's the most unusual or weird names you ever heard? And so the next day she sees him again and she tells him, well, perhaps your name is Roast Ribs or Sheepshanks or Spittleshanks. But he answered nothing but, this is not my name. Because, of course, why would he be named Spittleshanks? What a name, but anyway.
Well, why would he be named Rumpelstiltskin?
Well, yeah.
Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, there you go. You got me there. So, yeah. Anyway. So now it's the third day, and the messenger that she sent out comes back and he tells her that he hasn't found any new names. And so she decides to go out and walking or whatever, and she goes out into the woods and whatever, and she sees this little house. And before the house, there's a fire, and around the fire, there's this little man dancing. And of course, it's the little man that spun the straw in the go. And he sings, today I bake, tomorrow I brew, the day after the queen's child comes in, and oh, I am glad that nobody knew that the name I am called is Rumpelstiltskin.
He got too cocky.
He got cocky. So I don't really know why he would make this wager and then dance around singing his name, but he does. So the queen, of course, is very happy, she knows his name. And she goes to him and he asks, well, what's my name? So first she starts out and she says, well, are you called Jack? And he says no. And she says, well, maybe your name is Harry. And again, of course, he says no. And then she says, well, maybe perhaps your name is Rumpelstiltskin. So he becomes, of course, enraged and he starts screaming, the devil told you that. The devil told you that. And in his anger, he stamped his right foot so hard that it went in the ground above his knee. So then he grabs his left foot with both hands, and in such a fury, he tears himself in two, and that was the end of him.
Jesus Christ.
So he stamps his right foot down in the ground up to his knee, and then he grabs his left foot and rips himself in half. because she guessed his name.
This is really interesting story.
Yes, bad. I don't really know why he would have went to that extent, but yeah. So Rumpelstiltskin has ripped himself in half. And lastly, we're going to do the Frog King or Iron Henry, and it's also known as the Frog Prince. So basically, in old times, there was still a time where people could wish for things that they wanted and they would happen. So basically, there was this king, and he had these daughters, and they were all very beautiful. And near the castle where they lived, there was this great dark wood. And in the wood, there was this old linden tree and a well. And one day when it was hot, one of the king's daughters used to go forth into the wood and sit by the brink of this cold well and, cool down or whatever. And in the time, she sat there for a long time, she would take out this golden ball and she would throw it up and catch it again and again. And that was her favorite pastime. So she had this ball and she would go out there and see it and she would throw it up in the air and catch it and whatever. So she did this
That's
over and over.
pretty normal so far.
Right.
Well, it's only a matter of time before it goes off the rails.
Well, this one's not going to do that because why would it? So one day she's out there throwing the golden ball up in the air, but instead of catching it, this time it drops and rolls into the well. So she watches it as it sinks and she starts to cry, and because, she lost her ball. So out of the well comes this frog and he's like, "Why are you crying?" or whatever. And she tells him, that she dropped her ball into the well and she couldn't get it. And he tells her, "Don't weep. I can help you, but what will you give me if I fetch up your ball again?" And then she tells him, "Whatever you like, dear frog." And she tells him, "You can have any of my clothes, my pearls, my jewels, or even the golden crown that I wear." And he tells her, "Thy clothes and thy pearls and jewels and thy golden crown are not for me, but if thou wouldst love me and have me for thy companion and playfellow, and let me sit at the table with you and eat from your plate and drink from your cup and sleep in your little bed, if you would promise me this, then I'll dive down below the water and fetch your golden ball again." So she says, "Oh yes, I promise it all, whatever you want, if you only get me the ball again." But she thought to herself, what nonsense he talks, as if he could do anything. He can't do anything but sit in the water and croak at other frogs, so he can't possibly be my companion. But the frog, as soon as he heard her promise, drew his head under the water and sank down out of sight. But after a while, he came up to the surface again with the ball in his mouth and threw it to her, and she's overjoyed. And she sees her pretty plaything again, and she's caught up, and she runs off with it, and he says, "Stop, stop, take me too. I cannot run as fast as you." But it was of no use, for croak, croak after her as he might, she would not listen to him, and she ran home and forgot all about the poor frog and the promise she made to him.
What a bitch.
Yeah, she does that instantly. So the next day, she's sitting at the table, and she's sitting there with the king and all the court, and she's eating from her golden plate. And then she hears something pitter patter up the marble stairs, and she looks, and there is a voice crying out to her that says, "Youngest king's daughter, let me in." And she got up and ran to see who it was, and it was the frog. So she goes back and she sits back down and she's like feeling very uneasy. And the king notices, how she's acting. He says, "What are you afraid of? Is there a giant standing outside or whatever ready to carry you away?" And she says, "Oh, no, no giant, but a horrid frog." "And what does the frog want?" asked the king. And then she tells him, "While I was sitting at the well playing my golden ball, I fell in the water. And while I was crying for the loss of it, he came, the frog, and helped me and got it back." And she told him what the promise she made, and that he was now out there waiting and wanted to fulfill the promise.
This girl is not a good person.
No.
Don't like her.
No.
She is very mean. Also, she was so easy to back out on that deal.
Very quickly. So the king tells her, "That which thou hast promised must thou perform." So basically he tells her.
Thank God.
Right. He basically tells her, you made a promise, you got to go through with it.
Also, yay, the king's not also mean.
Right. Exactly. He's not. So he's telling her, you got to fulfill this promise. You made a promise. You got to do it. So she goes and she opens the door and she lets the frog in. And he tells her the frog, he tells her, "Lift me up and let me sit by you." But she delayed so long until the king had to finally just order her to do it. So she places the frog on the chair and he wants to get on the table. And there he sits and says, "Now push your golden plate a little nearer so that we may eat together." So she does this, but everybody can see that she's very unwilling. And the frog is eating heartily and he eats every morsel and everything. And he basically says, "Then I've had enough." So he says, "I'm tired, so you must carry me to your room and make ready your silken bed, and we will lie down and go to sleep." So she again begins to cry and was afraid of the cold frog, that nothing would satisfy him, but he must sleep in her pretty clean bed.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of Little House on the Prairie.
No, really?
The girl kind of reminds me of Nellie in a way,
Yeah.
like the original series,
Yeah.
older
She's
episodes.
kind of, yeah, she's snotty, definitely.
She reminds me of Nellie. The king reminds me of Nels.
Right. A little bit, yeah. I can kind of see that. So again, basically, she doesn't want to do this. She doesn't want to take the frog up to her bed. And the king basically tells her, you made this promise out of necessity at the time, and now you got to, fulfill it. So she picks up the frog with her fingers and her thumb, and she carries him upstairs and she puts him in a corner. And she lays down to sleep. And he comes creeping up to her to the side of the bed. And he says, "I'm tired and won't sleep as much as you. Take me up so that I can go to sleep, or I'm going to tell your father." So she gets angry and she's beside herself with rage. So she picks him up and she throws him with all her strength against the wall. And she cries out, "Now you will be quiet, you horrid frog."
Yeah, definitely reminds me of Nellie.
Yeah, she's not being nice at all. So she picks up the frog, she throws him against the wall, and but as he fell, he ceased to be a frog, and he becomes all at once a prince with beautiful, kind eyes. And it came to pass that, with her father's consent, they became bride and bridegroom.
Why would he want to marry her?
I do not know. That is a very good question, and that's one I'm going to ask myself: is why he would want to marry her. I have no idea. So he told her how a wicked witch had bound him by her spells, and how no one but she alone could have released him, and that they two would go together to his father's kingdom. So, and then comes to the door of the castle this carriage drawn by 8 white horses with white plumes on their heads and golden harnesses. And behind the carriage was standing his servant. And he had suffered such care and pain with his master, was turned into a frog. He was obliged to wear 3 iron bands over his heart to keep it from breaking with trouble and anxiety. Okay, so that's a little weird. So basically, the servant comes up on this carriage and he is so broken up because the prince was turned into this frog that he had to have this band put over his heart to keep it from breaking.
Sounds solid enough.
Sure. Okay, so they're riding along, and part of the way, the prince hears this sound at the back of the carriage if something has broken or is breaking. So he turns around and he cries, "Henry, the wheel must be breaking," which is the servant. "And the wheel does not break, 'tis the band round my heart," says Henry, "that to lessen its ache, when I grieve for your sake, I bound around my heart." And again, hears the same sound, and the prince thought it was the wheel breaking, but it was the breaking of the other bands from his heart, because he was now so relieved and so happy that the frog prince was now a prince again, and they went off to live happily ever after. So that one was...
I feel bad for the prince having to marry that girl.
She's not a nice person. No, she's not. Definitely not. So
I guess that's gonna wrap us up here.
Yeah, we're going to wrap it up this week, and we're going to come back next week, and we're going to do some Hans Christian Andersen and a little bit of Mother Goose, and that will wrap up the fairy tales, and then we're going to turn it back over to the gentleman after that at the next week, and he's going to pick back up with some more mythology for us. So we definitely want you to, like and subscribe, come back, listen, give us a go, and don't forget to stay disturbed.